Hi everyone, my name is Lachlan McRae and I'm a PhD student at Macquarie University. Today I'm going to be talking to you about my research, which is on the ecology and conservation of the large-eared pied bat and eastern cave bat. Before I get into things, I just wanted to mention that a biodiversity offset company called Thesium are the industry partner to this project, and the ECA have also very generously provided funding through one of their grants. I'm about a year into my PhD, so I started in July 2023, and it's a 3-year project where I'm expecting to when I'm expecting to finish in July 2026. And so I've only had one of my data collection periods so far, and so yeah, just getting the point across that I don't yet have all my results. So what I'm presenting today is just preliminary results, and yeah, just keep that in mind. Australia has one of the highest rates of mammal extinction in the world. Bats are mammals, and we have about 45 species of bat here in New South Wales, and of those 45, about 1/3 are threatened. Despite this, critical gaps in our knowledge of threatened bat species ecology persists, which hinders effective conservation efforts. The large-eared pied bat, which I'll sometimes refer to as dwyeri, and the eastern cave bat, which I'll sometimes refer to as troughtoni, are two microbats threatened with extinction, and specifically they're both listed as vulnerable under New South Wales legislation, but the large-eared pied bat has also recently been listed as endangered under Commonwealth legislation. Both species are very significant within the New South Wales biodiversity offset scheme, and that's because they're species credit species and also serious and irreversible impact entities. Both the species also have similar roosting habitat, and I just thought I'd quickly touch on what is a roost. It's essentially where bats live, typically throughout the day because they're nocturnal. And most of our bats roost in tree hollows, but a significant proportion also roost in caves and cave-like structures. And roosts can have lots of different uses, so shelter, protection from predators, socializing, and breeding. And that leads on to a particularly important type of roost called a maternity roost. And that's where bats will congregate during the warmer months of the year to give birth and raise young. Both my study species roost in shallow caves/overhangs and artificial structures such as buildings. And the 3 photos on the screen are examples of roost types that I've found the species using. And so I've got 4 overarching research questions, and each question is going to form the basis of a research publication. Today, I'm just going to be focusing on 2 of my 4 questions, which are these. 1, what habitat features are important and how do the species respond to human-modified landscapes? So we'll be deploying sound recorder grids to answer that question. And the second question is, what factors influence roost selection? So this will involve locating roosts and recording roost characteristics. And so while that's what I'm focusing on today, I am just going to quickly mention my other 2 questions, mainly so you know what to expect from me in future. So question 3, what do they eat? So we're going to use a DNA metabarcoding approach to answer that question. And question 4, are their populations genetically fragmented? And if so, what are the barriers to gene flow? Where is my research being conducted? So over here, you have dwyeri's distribution range, and over on the right, you have troughtoni's distribution range, and in the middle, so those distributions are overlaid, and my broad study regions are those red circles. And so it ranges from Royal National Park in Sydney all the way up to Blackdown Tableland National Park in Queensland. So my first research question, we're going to explore habitat use via a heat map of calling activity. Each site, we're going to deploy 28 ultrasonic sound recorders, so they record the high frequency echolocation calls of microbats. And the device we're using are audio moths, as shown in this photo. And if you take a look at this map here, so every red dot is an audio moth, and all 28 are deployed simultaneously for 6 consecutive nights to estimate average calling activity at each point/recorder. And so these recorder grids, they're going to cover a gradient of human disturbance, where one half is in urban housing or farmland, and the other half is in good quality vegetated habitat with also roosting habitat such as rocks. And I should mention as well, so these heat maps are only for the large-eared pied bat, not the eastern cave bat. And that's because the eastern cave bat's calls are very difficult to distinguish from the very common little forest bat east of the Great Dividing Range. This is an issue that I'm also working on at the moment, and so I've collected reference calls from both the eastern cave bat and little forest bat east of the Great Dividing Range. And so I've been extracting call metrics and scrutinizing the reference calls, trying to come up with some feature that can reliably separate the two species. And I've been working with a very knowledgeable guy called Alfred Skult. I'm not too sure if I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, but yeah, I need to give a lot of credit to him for all of his help. And I've also shared my reference calls with Brad Law and his research team. And so they're working on an AI recognizer, which is using machine learning to try to separate the calls. And they're also having some preliminary success. And so hopefully in about 6 to 12 months, I might be able to come back and then reanalyze these heat maps for the eastern cave bat as well. But for now, it's just focusing on the large-eared pied bat. And so there's going to be 7 sites in total, and one of those 28 recorder grids per site. And the sites are going to capture a range of disturbance levels. If you take a look down here, here's the 7 different sites. So on this side, these are mainly covering farmland. And if you go over on the right, this is a higher level of human disturbance where there's actual urban housing and traffic and all that kind of stuff. Today, I'm just going to be talking about 2 of the 7 heat maps. So one is McCulley's Gap and the other is Pearl Beach. All right, so this is the first recorder grid. It's not the heat map yet because I just want to point out a few important habitat features to keep in mind. And so there's this rocky ridge line that runs north to south through the western half of the grid. And this contains a lot of really good rocky overhangs and caves, and we actually found multiple large-eared pied bat maternity roosts along that escarpment. So yeah, I think that makes this site in particular pretty exciting. There's also this large vegetated gully here and a smaller vegetated gully just there. And finally, there's these 2 permanent farm dams, which is the only permanent water source within a few k's. So I'll show you the heat map now. I'll firstly draw your attention over to this color representation. And so there was a maximum average of 1,662 calls per night. And that's represented by the dark red, almost black color, which is this recorder up here. And so that was just outside 2 maternity roosts. Although they weren't, the bats weren't actually in those roosts at the time this grid was deployed, but I guess it shows they were still flying back there regularly at night. And yeah, back over here, so the lowest average number of calls per night was 4, and that's represented by the transparent white color. And I think it's interesting to point out that, yeah, so every single recorder here got at least an average of a few calls per night. So they did go everywhere, even though there is a massive difference in how many calls we are getting at the different recorders. And so yeah, what's my interpretation of this? So I'm seeing a lot of high calling activity along the rocky ridge line here where they're roosting. And then these bats seem to be all funneling down this vegetated gully here. And then these bats over here, they seem to be funneling down this vegetated gully and coming across and meeting up into this other larger gully. And then they all seem to be following this thin vegetation strip down, which brings them down to the two permanent water bodies where there is a lot of high calling activity. And a potential management takeaway from this could be that it could be important to conserve a vegetation strip connecting permanent water bodies to roosting habitat. And this section of the vegetation strip, it's only about 50 meters wide, so that could also inform a minimum vegetation corridor width. But I do have to stress that, yeah, this is just one site, and I've got a lot more data to analyze, so I can't give a conclusive result on that just yet. So now on to the next grid. This is at Pearl Beach, and this one, it's a more urban site with housing here. But of our urban sites, it's the least urban because there's a lot of good quality trees that go all throughout the town. And there's this permanent creek that runs east to west. It's quite substantial, and it opens up into a bit of a lagoon at this recorder here. There's also sea cliffs all along here, providing potential roosting habitat. And in fact, there's actually been a little bit of research done here previously where they caught only a single large-eared pied bat, and it was a male, but they did radio track it to this section around here of the sea cliffs, and so I've got a recorder there. And finally, there's a lot of good rocky overhangs just in from the sea cliffs here. And now let's see the heat map. I'll firstly just bring your attention over to this color representation. So yeah, look at this. The maximum average number of calls per night was 11. So yeah, significantly less calling activity here. And we actually had a bunch of recorders that had no calls at all. And yeah, so this is I think this is probably explained because there's not a large-eared pied bat maternity roost at this site, and it's also just after the maternity season, so you can see the dates up here. It's at the end of February. But yeah, anyway, interpreting the number of calls we do have, it seems pretty obvious that this permanent creek through here is where the highest calling activity is centered on. And now the bats are probably going there to drink, yes, but also that's probably where the highest number of insects are, so they can also eat the insects there. And now the next highest calling activity is here at the rocky overhangs. That's roosting habitat, so that would explain that. But on the last slide, I talked about the importance of a vegetation corridor linking a permanent water body to the roosting habitat. Here, there's no obvious corridor, but I think a plausible explanation for that is just that there's good quality vegetation everywhere, so the bats don't need to be funneled. They can just kind of fly any direction to get to the water. And finally, I just wanted to point out that while there is not much calling activity in the town, there is still at least a little bit of calling activity. So it's not like when they get to the town, they're just all of a sudden stopping. Occasionally they are flying in there. So yeah, something to keep in mind. I think it'll be interesting to see my more heavily urbanized sites where there's not as much nice trees in the town to see whether the bats will still be entering amongst the houses at those sites. Okay, so this is on to my next question, which is what factors influence roost selection? And you can kind of view this question as following on from the heat maps, where if you imagine on the heat maps, there's that really high calling activity around the rocks. Well, we're kind of zooming in now to work out, okay, at these high activity areas, what kind of rocky habitat are they actually using for roosting? And to answer this, we're going to deploy harp traps, as shown in this photo here. This is to capture the microbats. And now in this next photo, we can see, so once we've caught them, we can glue a tiny radio transmitter to the back of them. This will fall off after about 8 to 12 days, and then we can release them at night. And before the sun comes up, they'll go and fly to their diurnal roost. And then when the sun comes up, that's when I wake up and I will, as shown in this next photo here, get the antenna out and go try to track the bat down throughout the day to hopefully find its roost. And if we're successful, then we'll be able to collect all kind of roost characteristics, such as roost dimensions, aspect, all those kind of variables, as well as deploy one of these iButton devices. So they're a temperature logger, so we can also measure microclimate as well. And so when we get all these variables for all the different occupied roosts, we're also going to collect the same variables at other available roosts in the landscape, and then we can compare the occupied roosts to these available ones to work out what factors are driving roost selection. And then finally, we're also going to try radio track these bats over consecutive days to assess roost fidelity, which is essentially, do the bats go back to the same roosts every day, or are they moving to new roosts? And yeah, so onto some notable troughtoni maternity roosts. So yeah, I hope he might be excited by this. So here we have a small concrete structure, and when you go in there, that's this middle image, you can look up on the roof. It looks kind of small there, but yeah, that's actually an eastern cave bat maternity cluster. And if you go to the right, that's it right there. So yeah, pretty amazing, isn't it? And I'll point out as well, actually, come back to this middle image, it's actually quite light in there. Well, there's some dark corners, such as over here, and for some reason, though, they weren't roosting in them. They were just happy to sit out there in the open where it was relatively light. So yeah, it was an interesting observation. And now, yeah, conversely to an artificial structure, we've now got a natural cave here. And so, yeah, this was actually, yeah, a really exciting find. We just came around the edge of an escarpment, and yeah, we saw that cave entrance, and we thought, oh, we can't really ask for a much nicer looking cave. And yeah, we go in and it opens right up into this big dome. And this middle image here shows up on the roof. It's actually a bit hard to see, but that's another maternity cluster there. And if you go across to the right, you can see all the little bats. And yeah, so they're made up of mums and pups primarily, but we're also finding a fair few males like to get in the clusters as well. And so I also wanted to point out that these maternity clusters are permanently in these structures throughout the entire maternity season. And that means that there's a significant buildup of bat guano underneath them. And so you can go in there and even initially just look on the ground, and you'll see a thick layer. You won't even be able to see the ground underneath them of bat guano, and then that'll tell you where to look up, and yeah, the bat should be up there. And okay, and now so keep in mind this this concrete structure here and this cave, and I'll go to the next slide. Now this was pretty exciting, but that natural cave, we found that on this mountain here, and then 10 kilometers away at Glenbourne Dam, that's where the concrete structure was. And so I guess it's interesting for a few reasons. One is that if you find one of these maternity colonies, you might wonder, well, yeah, realistically, how close can I expect to find another one? Well, I think this is the closest record of two being together. But what I think is even more exciting is that we put a transmitter on the back of a lactating eastern cave bat on this mountain here. And so right at the end of our radio tracking, this is about 2 weeks later, when the battery of the transmitters was starting to run out and the transmitters were falling off the bats, well, we just so happened to pick up a signal from the concrete structure over here. And so, yeah, we went into the structure, and the transmitter, it had actually fallen off the back of the bat, and it was on the ground under the maternity cluster in the concrete structure. And so, yeah, well, a bit in disbelief at, what are the odds that the transmitter still had battery life in it, and when it had fallen off the bat, it happened to do so at that other maternity roost. And by that falling into place for us, that demonstrated that maybe these aren't distinct colonies, and there is at least some dispersal between them. And yeah, we think that's quite interesting, particularly because there's relatively cleared land in between this mountain here and Glenbourne Dam. And it also shows that they can move distances of at least 10 kilometers. And I kind of wonder, yeah, how many other of these maternity clusters are there in this landscape that are all linked up and they could be dispersing between. But yeah, anyway, we thought that was pretty cool. I've now got a short video to show you of some radio tracking I did at Dandry in Pilliga last summer. So yeah, check this video out. G'day everyone, I'm out in the Pilliga and radio tracking eastern cave bats and large-eared pied bats, and I'm currently at a lactating female eastern cave bat signal. Getting a bit stronger at this old schoolhouse, and if we turn over to this small little basic shed structure, we've got extra loud signal. You can probably hear that now. So let's go in and have a look. So that's the antenna, and up in there you have the lactating eastern cave bat. You actually can't really see it on this video, but she's up there with about 2 other bats, and it's pretty interesting for a couple of reasons. One is that she's lactating and she doesn't have her pups with her, and the other one is that it is a super hot day today, probably close to 40 degrees, and this thing's so hot in here, and for some reason they've just voluntarily chosen to come roost in this structure. And yeah, so if you ever see a structure like this, don't rule it out as potential roosting habitat for the eastern cave bat. And yeah, so this was actually a pretty common occurrence where we would regularly find lactating eastern cave bats forming these smaller roosts of, say, 2 to 8 individuals surrounding the central maternity clusters where the pups were. And yeah, it was interesting because they weren't taking the pups with them, but yeah, sometimes they would fly back to those central roosts, and I'll just show you this schoolhouse for a sec that was in the video. So we had multiple radio tagged lactating eastern cave bats flying to and from that building, and that one in the shed in the video, that also on some days was in there as well. And so we actually think this old schoolhouse is a maternity roost. Although we haven't been able to confirm it because it's hard to get in there, and we haven't actually seen any pups. But yeah, just something to keep in mind. Okay, so now on to some large-eared pied bat maternity roosts. I've got an example here. If you look at this top left image, because there's some vegetation out the front of it, and you might wonder, oh, how much veg can you really have? But yeah, they were happy to fly in and out of that. And if you move to the middle, that just shows how low-lying the roof was. So we literally had to get down on our stomachs and crawl in there. It's about 40 centimeters high. It's typically thought that bats won't roost in things as low as that because it's easier for predators to get them. But if you go to the image to the right, there you go. There's some beautiful large-eared pied bats. So yeah, definitely don't use those features to try rule out something as a potential breeding habitat. And now on to another example. So here's the entrance of a small rocky overhang, and in the middle on the roof of that entrance, it's a bit hard to see in the picture, but there's actually an active wasp nest, and so we had to crawl in underneath that to get into this cave. And I thought that's important to show though, because when you're doing your assessments of potential breeding habitat, you might wonder, oh, does this wasp nest, does it deter the bats from going in there? But you'll see the answer to that is no in a moment. And so if we go to this next image, see this protruding bit of rock on the roof? Well, now if we go across, that's looking inside that bit of rock, and jammed up in there, there's about 15 adult large-eared pied bats and about 15 pups. And so, yeah, that was very exciting. And these large-eared pied bats, they're a bit different to the eastern cave bats in that the maternity clusters, they're much smaller, so maybe 30 individuals as opposed to 100 to 200. But they also like to form these clusters much more hidden away in little cracks and crevices and stuff like that. And yeah, so when you're searching these caves, you really need to make sure you're looking in every little nook and cranny. You need to get right up in the darkest little corners, because otherwise you could miss them. And also, you can often look for bat guano on the ground, but for this species, I found that it's actually not the most reliable feature, because they leave, or at least sometimes leave, very little bat guano. You might be able to attribute that to the smaller size of the maternity roost, but I think there's another reason as well, which I'll touch on in this next slide. And that's to do with how frequently they move roosts. This top cave up here, that's if you look at this image on the right, that's inside that cave. And on the roof, in a small hole, we found a large-eared pied-bat maternity roost. I think we had 3 transmitters on 3 lactating females, and all of them happened to just come back and form this same roost here. And as we track them over consecutive days, they actually move to a new roost on each day. And so yeah, I think this is really important to know for a couple of reasons. So one is that the current published literature talks about how this species is faithful to just a single cave or roost mine tunnel, but my results are showing that they actually can move roosts on a daily basis. And there's another really nice lady and bat researcher. Her name's Amy Rouse. So she's also been doing some work on large-eared pied bats in Dungog, and she's had similar results where she's radio tracked them, and she's found them moving roosts as well. So yeah, in multiple locations we found this species doing that. And relating back to my last slide about why this species might be leaving little bat guano, well, yeah, maybe it's just because they've only relatively recently moved in there and moved on, so there hasn't been enough time passed for guano to accumulate. And yeah, something to keep in mind. And yeah, so I just thought I'd point out. So what are the male large-eared pied bats doing? So they're typically roosting individually and outside of the maternity roost, but not too far. We've even found a male about 30 meters away from the maternity roost. We've also found them a couple of 100 meters away. And so this image up the right, top left, is a rocky overhang. In the middle, there's a small hole on the inside, and all the way on the right, you can just see that's a solo male large-eared pied bat. And here's one other example. So this is on the outside of a big rocky outcrop. If we have a look on the side, there's small little holes like this, and all the way over, you can't see the bat in this one, but yeah, you can see the size of this small little hole. But just in there was a solo male large-eared pied bat, and I thought this one was maybe a bit more interesting because it's actually on the exposed outside surface of this rocky outcrop, unlike the one just above it, which it's tucked away on the inside of an overhang, which would be more typical, I would think. Okay, so yeah, last slide. I've just got some preliminary recommendations. The first one is to conserve a large rock formation, such as a section of an escarpment, as opposed to just a single cave. And I think this is particularly important for the large-eared pied bat, where it can have multiple maternity roosts on the one rock formation, but also those maternity roosts can move to new caves as well. And for the eastern cave bat, okay, so while those central maternity roosts with the pups, they seem to be permanent throughout the season, the individuals that make them up change, and the lactating females can leave them and go form these smaller, I guess you'd call them little satellite roosts or something like that, surrounding it. And so for that reason, it could be important to conserve a larger rock formation as well for eastern cave bats. And yeah, so related to the movements, particularly of the large-eared pied bat, I think caves need to be checked more than once for use throughout the maternity season. And I think the reason for that is obvious, just that, yeah, if you could check it and they might not be there, you'll call that cave absent. But then what if they fly in there shortly after? So yeah, something to keep in mind. All right, so we're moving on to the next recommendation, which is don't overlook artificial structures as potential breeding habitat, even when there is nearby a good quality rocky roosting habitat. And this is particularly important for the eastern cave bat, where I'm pretty sure every site I've radio tracked it at, they've more so actually chosen to roost in the artificial habitat. So toilets, sheds, buildings, houses, as opposed to the good quality rocky overhangs that aren't too far away. And there's even one site at Pearl Beach where we radio tracked just one male and one female. The male was always roosting by itself. The female roosted in, it had a small roost of maybe 5 individuals, but they exclusively roosted in the holiday houses in the town of Pearl Beach, as opposed to up in the rocky roosting habitat. And they would only go up into the rocks at night when they're out foraging and socializing. But yeah, throughout the day they always came back to the houses there. So yeah, they seem to like artificial habitat. For the large-eared piedbat, I'm actually yet to record any individuals using artificial habitat. However, other people have recorded them in. There's a big concrete building, and the initial maternity roost was in a mine tunnel as well. So yeah, you definitely still have to consider artificial structures as breeding habitat for the large-eared piedbat as well. And there's one other important aspect to do with this, and so I know a lot of you are BAM assessors. When you've got to go to a site and there's a little shed on it or something like that, and you have to consider it as potential breeding habitat, or yeah, they only seem to be important as potential breeding habitat if there's also other substantial rocky habitat within the broader landscape. And yeah, so it is hard to put a distance on it, but based on our current knowledge, it seems like these structures only get used if there is the good quality rocky habitat within about 10 kilometers. So yeah, that's just something to keep in mind when you're doing your assessments. And so my final recommendation is conserving a vegetated corridor of at least 50 meters wide between the rocky roosting habitat and a permanent water body. I've got there, it is probably important. And yeah, the reason I've underlined probably is because yeah, I still have a lot more data to analyze, so I need to make sure that I need to wait and see what that says before I can give conclusive results. But it is something to keep in mind. And yeah, I've got here, not yet applicable for eastern cave bat, because yeah, we're still working on features to separate its call from the common little forest bat. So yeah, hopefully in future we can come back and do it for that species as well. All right, that's it. I just want to quickly mention that there's literally been dozens of people and organisations that have made major contributions to this project, ranging from site access and equipment, funding, intel on roofs, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, thanks so much to all of them. I've listed a few key ones on the screen just there. I also want to thank the ECA for hosting the ECA Conference earlier this week and allowing me to present my research. And yeah, thanks so much for all of you listening. I hope you found it interesting and useful. And feel free to get in touch with me if you've got any questions. I've left my email address on the screen there, as well as my LinkedIn profile. So yeah, reach out either of those ways. And yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thanks.